So one of the first ways that we learn to add color to a chord is adding something called a seventh. In the case of a major scale, we have 7 different notes, and quite often we choose the first, third, and fifth note to create a major chord. Also in minor scales, if we were to take C minor for example, again there's 7 unique notes. If I was to play the first, third, and fifth note from a minor scale, then I get a minor chord. You probably see where this is going. A 7th chord also adds the 7th note of a scale. So in a C major scale, for example, we would have C, E, G, and B, the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. In C minor, in this case what we call a natural minor scale, it's naturally coming out of E flat major. What we're talking about here is the idea that the 7th note is a tone below the octave, because there's other types of minor scales like harmonic minor, melodic minor. In this case we're using the natural minor. So if I have a root, a third, a fifth, and this flat 7, now I have a minor 7th chord. So if we take the root, third, fifth, and 7th from a major scale, we get a major 7th chord. If we do this same process with a natural minor scale, we get a minor 7th chord. Now we are able to take a major chord, and instead of adding a major 7th, we could add a minor 7th. And inversely, we could have a minor chord, and instead of a minor 7th, we could add a major 7th. And again, just to clarify, the major 7th is a semitone below the octave, and the minor 7th is a tone below, and it can sometimes be called a flat 7. So let's start by talking about the 7ths that we can add to a major chord. So if we have a major chord and a major 7, let's just talk about this sound and how we are coloring the major chord. So here it is. It sounds beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily sound more major than a major chord. There's a little bit of tension, and that tension comes from this major 7th. If I bring the 7th down an octave, I have a semitone, and semitones are a bit crunchy, they're a little bit, well, they're quite dissonant. And if I bring that back up, you can see it's a little less dissonant than the semitone. If I do this again, less dissonant, less dissonant. So we've cured some of the dissonance of a semitone, but not all of it. And also, it doesn't necessarily sound more major, it has a bit of a minor influence, because when we play a major 7th chord, the top 3 notes are actually creating a minor chord. So sometimes when I'm doing ear tests with students, I'll play a major 7th chord, and they'll say minor 7th. It might be because of that influence of the top 3 notes being a minor chord. But at the end of the day, in harmony, the lowest note really sets that foundation. So these bottom 3 notes are going to be more powerful in terms of choosing the tonality. In other words, the major chord on the bottom is going to win the ear over rather than the minor chord that we would have on the top notes. So there it is, a major 7th chord. I just want you to listen to a few of them and see if you can give yourself some sort of descriptive word for how you picture this sound. Here we go. So safe to say, it's jazzy, it's colorful, and it's quite common. You'll see major 7th chords come up all the time in pop, in musical theater as well, and it just generally permeates a lot of different genres. Now if we were to take this major chord and apply a flat 7 or a minor 7th, now we have something called a dominant 7th chord. A dominant 7th chord doesn't necessarily sound finished. Now there is one style that I can think of where this does sound finished, and that would be the blues. For example, the ending of a blues. There's a dominant 7th chord, and it sounds perfectly fine for this genre as a closing chord. However, in most styles of music, this dominant 7th chord is going to represent tension, and generally it wants to fall a 5th. So 7 semitones down to a major or a minor chord. So we get C dominant 7, to F major, or C dominant 7 to F minor. Now in some cultures, this chord would be referred to as a major minor 7 because it's a major chord with a minor 7. And I think it's really smart to think of all of these seventh chords as a fundamental major or minor chord with some type of seventh. So while I totally get behind that type of naming, in the West, generally, we're going to call it a dominant seventh chord. So let's see what type of sound this dominant seventh chord creates. We have a major chord on the bottom, so fundamentally this chord is more major than minor. But where the major seventh chord added a minor chord up top, this dominant seventh chord is adding a diminished chord up top. A little bit sinister, a little bit spooky, and quite a bit tense. So that's what we're adding to the chord. Now I'm not saying a dominant seventh chord is spooky necessarily. This is still fundamentally very major, but there's some tension that we're adding. And again, this works really well throughout an entire blues. It is like the chord of the blues, but we hear it in classical music, pop music, rock music, etc. I'm going to play a few dominant seventh chords, and I just want you to listen to them and try to come up with some sort of descriptive term yourself for how this chord sounds to you. Here we go. Even just playing a few of these chords back to back, to me, already sounds kind of like a blues. So when you play them exclusively, you're going to get a bit of a bluesy sort of flavor. But we could even find this in something as simple as Für Elise. Minor chord, dominant seventh, back to a minor chord. So again, it's used in tons of different styles. It's major with quite a bit of tension, and it wants to generally fall down a fifth to a major or a minor chord. Over to our minor chords. We could have a minor chord with a minor seventh, again, a tone below the octave, and this is referred to as a minor seventh chord. A minor seventh chord kind of has the same duality as a major seventh chord in that it is a minor chord, but the top notes create this major chord. So it's like taking a minor sound, which we generally associate with like sad or scary, but we're kind of softening the sound with a bit of major up top. This is one of my favorite chords. It's also a bit ambiguous. I think this is the chord that catches students the most when I'm doing ear tests. It feels pretty neutral almost, but at the same time, I think it sounds pretty cool. So we have a minor chord on the bottom and a major chord created with these top three notes. So the words that I would use to describe this might be cool, soft, lush, kind of velvety. There's something about it. I just want you to come up with your own term though. I think it's important that, because I can give you all the terms that I think, but it's kind of like a flavor, right? It's like I could try to explain a flavor to you, but you might have a different sense of taste than I do. So I want you to come up with your own term for how you feel this chord sounds. I think there was an interview where Justin Bieber was in the studio and he said something sounded expensive. To me, this chord sounds kind of expensive. It's like you can use it for a lot of purposes. Most people are generally going to like the sound. And again, it's like a minor chord, but we're cutting through that minorness by adding a bit of a major flavor up top. It's used a ton in jazz and soul and R&B and funk, but if you use it exclusively, it also finds its way into a lot of electronic genres like house and drum and bass. If I take a C minor 7 and an F minor 7 and then maybe an unrelated A flat minor 7 and I play it with some rhythm, you'll see what I mean. Something like this. So it ends up sounding like it could work its way into some electronic genres as well. Now the minor seventh chord, unlike the dominant seventh chord, does sound finished for the most part, and it depends on the style. But if we're playing something like a jazz piece, that sounds finished in that genre. What's really cool about minor seventh chords is you can pretty much take any minor chord within a chord progression that you're playing, turn it into a minor seventh, and generally you won't like offend the listener. It's still going to sound colorful and jazzy, but appropriate at the same time. So there's the sound of the minor seventh chord. Let's talk about the other one where we have a minor chord with a major 7. So this minor major 7, first of all, the name explains exactly what's going on in the chord, and it is tense. It is a minor chord on the bottom 3 notes and an augmented chord on the top 3 notes. It's expansive, It is tense, and I call it sometimes the soap opera chord. It's like, and Johnny is in the hospital because I broke his arm. And then it transitions to another scene. But it's also very close to the James Bond chord. If we take these notes and add an extra D, that's that sort of intro chord for the James Bond theme. Now, admittedly, I don't use this chord very often, but I wanted to kind of make sure that we covered all four basic bases of major with both types of sevenths and minor with both types of sevenths. But one cool way to use this chord is if you're playing, for example, a C minor with a C on top, you can lower it down a semitone and then work your way down to that minor seventh. So it's a nice transitional chord into either a minor seventh or a minor chord based on how you want to expand or contract those top notes of the chord. Now, I use this chord quite a bit when I'm composing for film because as a single chord, it's very potent. Just listen to it. It is great for transitions and scenes and when we're trying to be tense, but imagine a bunch of violins all playing tremolo, slowly getting louder. This would be great in something like a horror or sci-fi scene. So while I wouldn't necessarily put this within chord progressions to replace a minor chord, it is important to understand how it sounds. I'm just going to play a few of them and I want you to come up with some sort of descriptive term yourself for how this chord sounds to you. Here we go. There it is, the minor major seventh chord. So to summarize what we've talked about, a major chord can have a major 7 or minor 7, and a minor chord can have a major 7 or a minor 7. The four types available are major with a major 7, known as a major 7, major with a minor 7, known as a dominant 7, minor with a minor 7, known as a minor 7th chord, and minor with a major 7, known as a minor major 7. Now, all four of these chord types are going to be included within a PDF for this course where I'm going to outline all the notes that you need to know and some suggested fingerings as well. Also, it might not be a bad idea to have a shorthand list, just a little note where you write down the names of the chords that we talk about within this course and you give yourself a couple of descriptive terms. This is especially great if you want to do something like film composition or something where each chord really has a sort of descriptive term, a function, a purpose, because if you really get intimate in terms of understanding how each of these chords sound to you, then you don't need to have a plethora of chords and a huge chord progression to get some sort of emotion across. You can be simplistic and just use the natural color of these chords to convey some sort of message to the viewer. Something else I want to mention is that we talked about taking the first, third, fifth, and seventh note from a scale to create these seventh chords. Now, the melodic minor, for example, might be used to extract the minor major 7 chord, or something known as a mixolydian mode would be used to create this dominant chord or extract the dominant chord out of that mode. But the two easiest ones to understand are the major 1 3 5 7 and the natural minor 1 3 5 7. And then from there you understand the concept and you can start to think less in terms of extracting out of a scale and more just what type of chord do I have, what type of seventh do I have, when I combine them, what sort of emotion does it convey? So if you found yourself asking what scale is a minor major 7 chord coming out of, I would say don't concern yourself with it too much. This is a class on coloring chords and really just hearing the chord and trying to understand how it sounds to you. So that's it for this class on 7th chords, a great starting point for coloring chords. I'll catch you in the next class.